I'm Mark Boris and this is Straight Talk.
I did the documentary because I didn't want him to not be here anymore.
Delvene Delaney. Welcome to Straight Talk. We're here to talk about a whole lot of stuff. You were married for a long, long time to John Cornell.
Yeah, we met in the pub.
Of course.
I know. It's like you read about in the love stories. Everything he did, he thought big, whether it was World Series cricket or the Paul Hogan shows or certainly Crocodile Dundee. And so he had no fear and he had tremendous self-belief.
You talked about Crocodile Dundee 1 being to some extent a love story between Hogs and Linda. Is this documentary about the love story between Delvene Delaney and John Cornell?
Yeah. This is a love letter to John.
Delvene Delaney. Welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you for having me.
How long have we been mates for?
Well, you just reminded me it was 22 years, so I was such a slip of a girl.
You were. You still are.
Oh, yeah.
Look at you. You're gorgeous.
Your
cheeks just went a bit red too.
I know, I'm blushing. Thank
Actually,
you.
I probably knew you before that because I think that I was hunting around up there, Byron Bay area with Ginja, mate Ginja. He probably used to stay up at one of the A-frame at your place up there.
He stayed in every house I had. He spread himself around.
And now he lives up there.
He was welcome.
And now he lives up there. He's your neighbour.
Now he's a neighbour.
And my neighbour too. Well, we're here to talk about a whole lot of stuff. You were married for a long, long time to one of the people that I consider, and I'm not an aficionado on this topic, but I consider to be one of the greatest creators in Australian television and probably a lot of other things too, in an entrepreneurial sense, ever. Of course, John Cornell.
Yeah.
How long ago were you guys married?
We were married for 46 years.
46 years.
Yeah.
And he passed away. How long ago now has he passed away?
It'll be 4 years in July.
4 years. Wow. That's mad. I do want to talk to you about that. Not his passing, but I want to talk to you about how you met.
We met in the pub.
Of course.
I know. Who'd have thought that we would have had one for 30 years afterwards, but we met at Five Ways in Paddington. And he had been apparently perving on me in TV Week, which I didn't know. I'd just sort of started a fledgling television career. And I sat next to Paul Hogan at a footy event for one of the networks, I think it was 7, and we hit it off. And at the time they had only a guest actress every month on the Paul Hogan show. So Paul reported back to John saying, I met that Delvene Delaney. She's a bit of all right, mate. You'd like her. I think we should have her on the show. So as a result of that, when I was in this pub and my date went to the toilet and his date, I don't know where she was, but he left her to come over to me and he said, oh, you don't know me. I'm John Cornell. I produced the Paul Hogan show. Would you like to be on it? And I just dropped to the floor pretty much and said, yes, please, because that was probably the biggest break that I could have had at that stage of my career. And so a couple of months later, I was up in Sydney doing the rehearsal and saying yes to every single thing that he asked me could I play, even though I'd never done any of them, because I didn't want to lose my chance. So that's how we met, and that's how we started a romance a couple of months after that.
What is it attracted to him when you first met him? What was
his sense of humour.
Was it instant though? Was it an instant sense of humour? Instant
chemical attraction from both of us. It's like you read about in the love stories. And I think too, he was, John was 10 years older than I am, so I'd always liked older men, and he ticked the boxes in so many ways. He was good looking, he was funny, he was smart, he was kind, he was sexy. He was all of those things that a woman could ever want.
Intelligent too. Very,
very, very intelligent. Yeah, John had the kind of mind that I could never anticipate. If somebody said to me, can you find, what would John say to that? And I thought, you'd have to ask John. I could never get it right. And so he had a very original way of thinking, and he was expansive. He wasn't afraid to think big. Everything he did, he thought big, whether it was World Series cricket or the Paul Hogan shows or certainly Crocodile Dundee. And so he had no fear and he had tremendous self-belief. And he had more belief in Paul Hogan than Paul Hogan had in himself, which is what Hogs has readily admitted to. And so I think that when you have somebody believe in you so strongly, it gives you the confidence to go forward with great ambition, which is what Paul did because he knew he had John backing him. And I think too, it was such a symbiotic relationship that they were like soul brothers. You know, they really were on the same wavelength and aiming for the same high things. And they both were great patriots. And so I think that whole thrust drove their careers and determined what they wanted to do.
You said you were featured in TV Week. I seem to recall back in those days, and I don't know what you were doing at the time. Were you doing Sale of the Century, or what were you doing at the time?
No, I was doing some other dodgy quiz show.
Quiz show.
I did a few dodgy quiz shows. This one was called High Rollers.
High Rollers. It's no longer going.
It was certainly not, no.
Oh, I do remember you in the Sale of the Century. Every young man remembered Delvene Delaney in the Sale of the Century. People watched it. We didn't care about the quiz part of it. We were more interested in seeing Delvene Delaney. I can now tell you that after 40 years or so, and I've never made that admission to you, but now I'm making that admission to you. So I hope you don't mind.
No, you're safe now.
Yeah, I'm safe now. No, you're safe now. That's the better part. Okay. But how? And you actually probably, I would say, during that period, over a 10-year period, you would have been probably the most featured person on the front of a lot of the magazines, Women's Day, Women's Weekly, TV Week, all the other stuff that was out there. I mean, you're always on the front of a cover, or always featured in a lot of the covers. Why do you think there was such a fascination with you during that period? What do you think?
I think television is a very transparent medium, and I think that if you're not authentic and honest, people see straight through you. And so I just tried to be myself, really, and I operate from a place of kindness and compassion. You know, I believe in building people up, not bringing them down, and kindness is a currency. And I think that people relate to that, and they can recognise that. When I was getting, this sounds a bit wanky, but when I was being driven to the studio in my limousine, I'd ask the driver, take me the back way through the poorer neighbourhoods, because I knew that when I was recording that show, I was going to be trying to sell a $2,000 Mont Blanc pen to my audience, and that audience were those people right across Australia, but certainly inclusive of all neighbourhoods. And so it had to be, my attitude to that had to be relatable to people from all walks of life. And so I didn't want to elevate myself. I wanted to make sure that they were on my plane. I'm on your plane too. I came from a family that didn't have any money, and so I understood the value of money and how difficult it is sometimes to keep it and make it. And so I think that was probably one of the qualities. I'm a ready laugher. You know, I had a co-star who was a little bit difficult to work with. A couple of times one time I got him in the nose with a powder puff because he was being he was annoying me. So we did it in front of a live audience and he was being annoying, and so I got this powder puff that was on the set and just went boop on his face and all this powder. And the director saying, cut, and I'm saying, leave it in, you know. Everyone loved that because I don't like him either.
Hopefully he's watching. He probably would be.
I don't know, but, you know, it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can fool people. And so maybe that was part of the reason why people related. And the same with Hogs. People related to Hogs because he told the truth. He was authentic. And I think that was also what John was. John was lucky in that he could hide behind strop and not get recognised, and people didn't really know who John Cornell was. But
Now, Strop, for those people who don't know, Strop was his alter ego. It was his other character. That was the character in the Paul Hogan show. Strop was John Cornell's character.
Hogs' dopey sidekick, as Hogs would say, the 40-year-old virgin who wore a lifesaver's cap and a twisted grin. And he was hilarious. In fact, in those sketches, Hogs was Strop's straight man because Strop was funnier than Hogs in those particular Hogs and Strop sketches. And so I think having this 40-year-old virgin who was constantly leering after women, usually me in the sketch, was also something very relatable to young boys who were watching. Like, I've got to try to get the girl. Doesn't matter how dopey I am, I'm going to try to get the girl. And one day I might win. And he did, because we married. So that was curious, because my mum actually thought I was dating Strop.
You're going to marry that guy.
I know.
Mum, I'm going to bring him home to meet you.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I wonder when I think about what you said in terms of how you describe Strop, I wonder whether you would know what it was about you that he found attractive. I mean, because I find both of you refreshingly honest, normal, both funny, both creative, and both really kind. You're both very kind-hearted, like not putting it on. And I'm not here to, blow smoke up your proverbial, but that is the truth. That's how you guys are. That's why everyone loves you guys, both of you. Do you think that he saw the same things in you that you saw in him? Because it sounds like a real commonality.
Definitely. And I think too that we're both nature lovers. We'd spend a lot of time camping. In fact, I had my honeymoon in a tent. And John had a 4-year-old daughter at the time, whom I inherited as a 23-year-old, which was not what I'd planned.
You were 23, yes.
Yes, and so I think that he just could see that I was very accepting of life and capable of just handling, or at least trying to, anything that was put in my way. Yeah, well, I'll have a go. And I think that have a go mentality really underpinned John and Paul as well. My mummy used to say, if you want to try something, just have a go. Have a go. You might be really good at it. And her words would ring in my ears whenever I would try anything new. And so, I think that was part of John's way of life as well, and probably connected us in that attitude that, just have a go at something and try your best and keep your sense of humour.
Would you be able to just remind us or inform us, like, what was the background behind the Paul Hogan show? Like, what was the genesis of it? The idea. What was the Paul Hogan show supposed to do? Present in terms of the two characters. What were you trying to tell the audience? And how did it start? Was it difficult? You came into it later on, but you must know the whole story. So, and did it have to present to who? Who did you have to pitch the idea to? Who did John pitch it to?
Channel 9 first, and then it went to 7, and then it came back to 9. But John and Mike Willesee founded A Current Affair. They were both journalists together in Western Australia. John was Australia's, I think still is, youngest super A-grade journalist. So at 23, he was writing a back page column. At 25, he was a London editor. So he had a very golden journalism career. They left Perth to go to Melbourne and started up A Current Affair. John named it, and he was the producer. And because he'd worked in newspapers with the likes of Paul Rigby, who was one of Australia's eminent cartoonists, and went on to work in New York, when he saw Paul Hogan's piece that Tony Ward had done after Paul had won New Faces, when he saw his piece on A Current Affair, John realised that this is the guy that he'd been looking for to give ordinary Australians commentary on the week's events. At the end of the week, he had a Friday afternoon slot, just once a week. He'd go into the studios, put his hand out, they'd give him some cash, much more than he was getting paid to work on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. put it in his pocket and back to the bridge. And then Mike and John had a bit of a bust-up.
As in Wellesley?
Mike Wellesley. So John left and Paul went with him. And they tried a couple of things. They made a special, Hogs in Singapore, Hogs in England. And then it became obvious to John that he had to have his own show. And so they did a pilot, which I found in my archives.
And that'll be in the documentary coming up?
Doco, yep. 1974. And then it went from there because it raided its head off, because what they were asking Australians was to be themselves and to not be ashamed of who they were. And we had cut the umbilical cord to England by then. Well, they did. They had a big role in sharpening the blade to cut the cord, because Aussies were kind of cringing at our identity a bit. You know, we didn't have much national pride back in the early 70s. Even the newsreaders spoke with a clipped British accent.
I remember.
And so out comes Hogs. G'day, viewers.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a bit about what the news that isn't, but should be. You know, let me tell you what you should be hearing, kind of thing. This is the truth. And he did it with such naturalness and humility and affection that nobody took offence to it. It was like, yeah, we should have a voice. And yeah, that's how we sound when we use that voice. We're Australian.
That's really interesting. So, Deli, are you saying that one of the big objectives of the two of them was to give Australians a voice outside of what we're used to being fed through the media, through the news, for example? It was actually giving us a voice. Someone who sounds like us, someone who probably looks like a normal Aussie, you know, like shorts, the sawn-off shirt they used to have on, the fair hair and the whole look. Yeah, the boots and the socks, the workers' boots and the socks sort of just coming above the top of the boots. Was it the objective to make Hogs someone we all identify with, which I did as a kid and was a young man? And was it also that he was going to say what I think or what my colleagues might be thinking, or say it in a way that my colleagues might be thinking, not the way that we're going to get fed by the ABC or Channel 9 News or whoever it was doing the news at the time? That's a bigger issue that's a much bigger objective than just being a comedy show.
Well, it wasn't political, but it was patriotic.
Yeah.
And I think that what they were trying to do was to not give Australians a voice, but give Australians permission and encouragement to have a voice.
Interesting.
Because we weren't being represented, certainly in the media and possibly in newspapers, as who we were. And so, they steered away from politics, really, apart from sending up politicians. So, if you ask Hogs that question, he would say, all I want to do is make people laugh. In the most humble of ways, he would tell you that. But behind that, there were also these other larrikin qualities, and larrikin just means somebody who's anti-establishment and anti-authority. And at that time of Australia's trajectory, we needed a big dose of larrikinism to be able to stand on our own feet and not feel ashamed of it.
We still do.
Yeah, probably. There's never been another Paul Hogan. So I hope we haven't forgotten that encouragement to have the courage to say, no, we don't want to be represented like that. That's not who we are. And to know who we are. And I think that was part of the success of Crocodile Dundee, because Mick Dundee was somebody so many of us wanted to be, or could certainly recognise as somebody that we'd like to meet and know and be mates with.
Have a beer with.
And that extended all over the world. They started to see Aussies as being approachable and friendly and harmless and up for a laugh, and all those qualities that we all as Australians have.
But no pushover.
But don't celebrate, and certainly not a pushover.
Yeah, because we don't want that either.
No.
I mean, John was outside of Croc Dundee and outside of the Paul Hogan show, John was actually very creative in his own right as well. Can you just take us through the conversation of his pitch with Kerry Packer around World Series cricket? I mean, I've heard the story many times from John, but like, to take the audience through it, like,
well,
tell me about it.
Yeah, so Kerry Packer was a big cricket fan. He didn't like the way that it was being covered. He thought he could have done better with his Channel 9 team, so he approached the cricket board to try to get the rights from the ABC. Test cricket then was boring and bland and only covered by two cameras and, very white bread, boring coverage. So they knocked him back. That put a bee in Kerry's bonnet.
He didn't like that.
He didn't like that. And so at the time, John was managing Dennis Lillee, who was the world's fastest fast bowler and being paid less than the guy who moved the sight screen, as in those days, behind the players, which infuriated John. And so he decided to go to the board and try to get more money for the players. And the board said no to that too.
This is Australian Cricket Board.
Yeah. So then neither of those men like to be defeated, particularly when there's honour involved and justice and fair play. Those guys weren't being paid enough. They were being trotted out as 11 flannelled anonymous fools to pay for very little money and not be able to really hold down another job and be expected to be patriots for their country and no reward. And so John went to Kerry Packer and said, I've got this idea, mate. We should sign up the world's best cricketers and start our own competition. And Kerry loved it. And so John came up with the idea of coloured clothing, using the white ball, putting microphones in at the base of the stump so you could hear the players, covering it with 8 cameras, overhead shots, like all of those really innovative ideas to reinvigorate cricket, one-day games, night cricket. And Kerry was just totally on board and didn't mind being the front man for it because it gave him a chance to vent off at the cricket board.
A good square up.
Absolutely square up. And so it was a wild ride because I remember them trialling all of these other colours for the balls as well, orange and hot pink and bright red, and then trying the white ball and seeing what would happen to it when Dennis Lillee did that. So
This is his trademark, though.
Yeah. So it was extraordinary, and it wasn't a lay down misère. It was failing.
The World Series cricket?
Initially.
In the beginning?
Yep, until John went to Big Al of Mojo, Alan Johnston, and said, we need an anthem. And he knew Alan Johnston because they'd done the Winfield ads and, that was a top ad agency at the time.
Alan Morrison, Alan Johnson, Mojo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him.
And so in his inimitable voice, Big Al, as I lovingly call him, came up with Come On Aussie, Come On.
A great song.
And then we got ads on radio and John would go into Channel 9 late at night and say, well, not even so late sometimes, what ads have you got on? He said, we've got, 3 Harvey Norman and 2 Toyota. And he said, well, take one of the Harvey Norman ones off. Put a promo on for World Series cricket. Kerry said it's all right.
Because he's a cheeky bugger, John.
So cheeky.
Cheeky. Like, it'd take a bit of risky cheeky bugger. Like, so they take the risk because then deal with it later.
Calculated risks.
Yeah.
He'd think about it first and think, yeah, can I get away with that? Yeah.
And if it's a good outcome, Kerry won't complain.
Always a win-win outcome. And he used to say, the art of a good negotiation is when both parties leave the table feeling like they've won.
That's very good.
So if you can pull that off.
And that World Series cricket song, Come On Aussie, Come On, that still gets played everywhere. I mean, people still sing it. Everyone knows it. Australians know it. They'll sing it at the cricket. They'll sing it at lots of events. That was a pretty. Do you think that was an iconic moment for
Absolutely.
World Series cricket? Getting the tune and the beat. It just all worked out well.
Just turned it around, and I can remember hearing that and driving across the Sydney Harbour Bridge from Kerry's place to ours, playing it at the top volume I could possibly. It was the most infectious, wonderful anthem for Australia, and that's in the doco. I put that in the doco as well, and when I played it with, to various people, went, oh, I remember that, knew all the words, just stood to their feet. Oh, that was such a great moment. And it was back in the day when I think there was more engagement by the public to cricket, because at the end of that ad, everybody runs onto the ground.
Which you can't do.
No, you're not allowed to do anymore. So it was like, and people sitting on the hill. And, it was back in the day when things were a bit more relaxed and you could reach people, I think.
The song itself, one of the reasons I used to always think it was so successful is because it had like an underscore of nostalgia. It's very nostalgic, the song. Come on, Ozzy. It was very evocative, evoked nostalgia in my mind. Like, it made me feel nostalgic about stuff. It still does, to be honest with you. It's like it was presenting to me a time that used to be and that I had missed and that it should now be there again. And I thought the song was like, it actually brought to life World Series cricket because it added that sort of emotion to it. Cricket was cricket, and sure, we're going to buy this player, we're going to buy that player, and we're going to pay him more money. All that stuff, all those things are really important rungs in the process of doing something revolutionary, rebellious, which is very much an Australian spirit. But the song brought it to life.
Yeah.
And John knew that. I mean, I ask you, did John know in the back of his mind, I need to get someone like the Mojo guys to write the song for me?
There was no other choice. And I think, too, that what World Series cricket brought was identity for the players. And so then you can attach yourself to something and you can have a favourite player because you know who they are.
Yeah.
And so, Lily's pounding down like a machine. Pasco's making divots in the green. Marshy's taking wickets. Dougie's clearing pickets. The Chapel Eyes have got that killer gleam. Suddenly you know who these players are in close-up on your screen. Then you can identify. Then you've got a connected audience. And so that's what was missing from the ABC's coverage and the Cricket Board's old-fashioned British style of television coverage, is that they are 11 flannelled fills. You don't know who they are. So if you've got somebody particularly like Dennis Lilly with his shirt buttoned down to here and his gold chain and long hair.
And the hair on his chest.
I like him.
Yeah.
Who's he? Well, now I know. And so you've got an invested audience, and that's what part of it anyway, what brought them to the game. And there were jingles played and competitions. Can you name the next line? The whole marketing campaign was brought to life to further its success, and it wouldn't have happened without that song.
Given John, as we talked about earlier, he passed away a couple of years ago. Do you think would John think that was one of his greatest achievements? Not getting World Series cricket away, but the effect of World Series cricket, the effect of the song, the effect of identifying with players, engaging the consumer or the audience closer to the players, getting more money for the players is great too, but engaging the whole box and dice. Would he, if he was sitting here now, and probably AI could do that for us, but if he was sitting here now next to you, do you reckon that would be one of his greatest achievements?
Yeah, and I think the reason was that it achieved the outcome that he sought, was to get a better deal for the players and to create a more entertaining form of cricket for the viewers. John was egalitarian and he was also values-driven, and he did things for the good of all. And so that's what drove him. He didn't take any money for World Series cricket, just like he didn't take any money for the Australian tourism campaign.
This is put the shrimp on the barbie?
Yeah. I don't want the money. I just want a good job done, because he wanted to achieve his ambition, which was to get better recognition and better outcomes for all of those guys who were devoting their time for Australia.
Sort of nation-building stuff.
It is absolutely nation-building. It's nation-building.
But not unelected. In other words, he's just doing it on his own bat. And pardon the pun, but he's doing it on his own bat.
Good one.
And it just came out naturally. Because he actually had a broader purpose in his life. But that's amazing. Not many people like that. Most of us are all pretty selfish, thinking about, well, what's in it for me? What can I get out of it? I don't mean in a bad way, just how can I get ahead? He was actually sitting back and thinking of these things, and he had the perfect, by the way, in most respects, he had the perfect host, which is Hogs. We get back to Hogs now. let's just settle down for a second on the whole Crocodile Dundee, from where it started, the idea. I mean, where did the name come from for a start? Crocodile Dundee.
Well, it came from Hogs.
No, but where did they think of the name?
Well, Hogs, because he was. We just moved to Byron. We'd kind of finished with the Paul Hogan show. We'd gone, 9 years. It was, for me, it was like 11 or 12, I think, for them.
You were doing at that time. You were doing Sailor Century.
Yeah.
Yep.
After we moved to Byron, and so they were looking for something. John was always wanting to make a movie with Hogs. Always believed that he had star quality. So he was writing scripts, and at the same time, Paul was in New York on one of the tourism campaign trips, and he was walking back through a very crowded New York street at peak hour and being jostled and people everywhere, and he felt like a real hick. And he's thinking to himself, if I feel like a hick, imagine how Barney, who lives down the road, feels like. How would he feel? Or even better, a bloke from the outback. And by the time he got to his room, he had a story formulated. And that was an outline for a script. He expanded on the idea of the fish out of water concept to this outback bloke who ends up in New York City. So all good film stories have to have a protagonist and an antagonist and a theme, and the love story was the theme. And so Hogs only ever writes in block capital letters. So he wrote it out in block capital letters. It got typed up, and then John took his red pen to it. And as Hogs will say, he's the greatest sub-editor he'd ever met. He would always stop Paul from being over lengthy in his monologues, or any other time he had to sort of say a lot of dialogue. John was very pithy. He was a great editor, and he had journalism as a background. So he would write concisely and improve it and keep honing and honing. And he did that constantly with Hogs, whether it was his performance or his writing. So he got hold of it, and together they transformed it into the script that it became. I read the second draft the other day, and it was nowhere near what the final draft was like. I actually read the initial one over John's shoulder, and then he asked me to read it. And there are a couple of things in there where you thought, nah, Hero wouldn't do that. And so, I'm not suggesting that I had much input, but
I think you did.
A female perspective was sought. And so it came to life. But essentially, it's Hogs. Hogs will tell you that Mick Dundee is just Hogs in the bush.
For real. Yes.
That's in the doco too. Yeah.
Because it's real.
It's real.
You
it's
can't
authentic.
you can't be authentic yourself. You just can't beat that, because you can't act that out. It is what it is.
That's right. But Hogs in the bush is different to Paul Hogan in the bush. Hogs is the character.
Yeah.
The quintessential Aussie bloke who'll tell you what's
put
going on.
But it doesn't matter. He put it on well. You said something really important, well, actually very interesting to me as someone who knew John, is you said John took the red pen to it, and where the dialogue was too long, he would make it shorter. John was, you used the word, he was very pithy. John, to me, was always the master of the 10-word response, but it was always funny, to the point, and very economical, but straight to the point and quickly. I mean, there's only one other person in the world that I've ever met that I find similar. That's Ginge, David
Absolutely.
Ginge. That's probably the reason why him and Ginge got on so well, because Ginge can just come up with a response in a second.
Yes.
It actually kills me, because you're at a party or somewhere and he will just come out with something out of left field nowhere, and it is so perfectly positioned.
Yeah.
And John was the same.
Yeah.
John will put it into writing for the show.
Yeah.
For the movie,
and
I'm
for
saying.
The films. Yeah.
That's
was
a real
one
skill.
of his skills. And I agree with you about Ginge. And Ginge is in the doco too, and that's how he delivered his pieces. Like when we asked him a question, straight to the point,
off the cuff,
top of his head, concise, exact, entertaining. and informative, all in the middle of like 4 seconds. He just nailed it.
That's why I need an hour podcast, because I can't do that. He could do this whole podcast in about 5 minutes or something, and it'd be exactly perfectly done. It is a real skill. I don't know if it's something you develop. I think it's something you're born with. I mean, it's a thing.
You're born with it for sure.
Yeah.
That's a type. And, when we were in partnership at the Hotel Brunswick with Ginge, and we'd have these meetings I'm like, what? don't say the sums. I need to write them down, because he'd be so quick, so staccato with, machine gun rapidity, like just rattling off all these numbers. And I don't know if that's because he's dyslexic.
It could be. It could be something
compensates with a different skill for being so quick-minded. But he's extraordinary. And John, Ginge will tell you, was like his surrogate dad.
I was going to say John had a great love of Ginge.
Yeah. And Ginge was like John's surrogate son, because John only had daughters.
Yeah.
And so they were real kindred mates. They had a fantastic relationship.
And I do remember. I remember one time we sat at the back of the pub and we're having dinner with you, John, Hogs, Ginge, and me. And I don't think I said a word the whole night. I just sat there in awe, listening to everyone riff off each other.
Yeah.
John and Ginge and Hogs just riffing off each other the whole time. It was like watching an episode of the Paul Hogan show, except that Ginge was in it as well, playing himself, and and these individuals, but naturally so fast and funny. Like it wasn't scripted. And they were talking about all sorts of topics, politics, whatever it was. They just tear shreds off everybody, by the way, like mercilessly tear shreds off everybody. It's an amazing skill that you were able to sit around and live with that for forever. I mean, you sat in those environments for 40 years. Was John like that naturally at home? Was that his
that was a huge part of his appeal.
At home, though?
Yeah. It was that we could have these really witty conversations and make each other laugh and be on the same wavelength like that, And I think maybe that's what attracted him to me too, was that, here's somebody that I could really riff with. And he was very much a dreamer. He was a dreamer in so many ways, that he needed somebody like me, because I'm the doer, Pisces Virgo, to get the job done. And I loved that part of it. I loved being able to make a contribution back. Like, I'll do that. You just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do that. And then within that, but what if we do this? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea, Delly. And so it was tremendously creatively collaborative. And I think that really added a spark to our relationship, though some people would say never work with your wife or never work with your husband. But for us, it was sort of part of the underlying attraction, was that we could create something together and understand where each other's minds were at to make it happen.
Do you miss him?
Yeah. I think that's kind of like why I did the documentary, is because I didn't want him to not be here anymore. And it was really confronting to see footage of him looking so prime and sexy and smart and gorgeous in that behind-the-scenes Crocodile Dundee footage. But even though it was extremely challenging and I was in tears most days looking at it, at the end I didn't want to let it go. And I think that when I release the film, I'll feel like I can let it go, because I don't want to hold him here in his spirit. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I am a little bit by making him feel so alive. He'll always be in my heart. And I have a photograph that I talk to. I talk to him. And whatever pops into my head is like, thanks, John, because this doesn't sound like me. So I never want to lose that. But as well as not wanting to let him go, I also wanted him to be honoured for his contribution, because he was, as you say, so much behind the scenes and stayed out of the limelight, didn't want public accolades, didn't believe in blowing his own trumpet. But I wanted to blow it for him, because I know what that guy did for Australia, for Paul's career, for cricket, for everything he put his patriotic hand to, always in the most altruistic way, always for the greater good. That needs acknowledging and applauding. And it wasn't just his contribution in Crocodile Dundee. It was everybody else who wasn't recognised as much as Paul was, and rightly so. He's the star. But Russell Boyd, who did this incredible cinematography, Australia's premier cinematographer, doing a comedy film. And that's, I think, a whole other element to Crocodile Dundee, is that it has this grandeur and magnificence of photography in the outback, because somebody like Russell Boyd was helming that as cinematographer. And even though it was a comedy, it just felt big because of his skill and his team, like the key grip, Ray Brown, and the composer who wrote a fantastic, unforgettable score, and Linda, who's never really been asked about her role on the film. When I interviewed her, she said, "Oh, no one ever asks me. They always talk about me, but they never ask me." I said, "Well, you go for it, because I'm now asking you, what happened to you in that whole story?"
Looks like she fell in love with Paul.
And she did.
And I mean it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Peter Feynman, the director,
Yep.
who's in the documentaries, he also comments on that, watching that unfold, because we shot chronologically. So they didn't know each other at all at the beginning of the film.
How did she get sourced? Why did they pick Linda
Kozlowski.
Why did they pick Linda? Her?
They wanted. We couldn't afford a big name. Paul had never made a movie. John had never made a movie. But Peter Feynman had never made a movie. And Linda had never made a movie. And so you start off fresh with new faces and new attitudes and people who really want to perform. And so John picked Linda out in a lineup of black and white photographs, and then flew her out here for the job. She auditioned in LA, flew her out here for the job. Paul couldn't even make eye contact with her at first. He's quite shy, particularly around women. In all the years that I worked with him on the Paul Hogan show, I never saw him stray. A very honourable man. A lot of opportunity, but didn't take any of them. And so Linda found that weird because, she came from a background of training with Juilliard, which was a highly regarded drama school in New York City. Paul hates to rehearse. He didn't even want to rehearse. So she's wondering, what the hell am I doing here? And she's in the outback where there's everything to bite you and some things that might eat you. And she's petrified because she comes from New York City. She had this fear of bugs. She would go and sleep on the floor of Peter Feynman's cabin with Peter and his wife in the bed, her on the floor, because she was too scared to stay in her own cabin.
Wow.
Initially. So Peter Feynman spent a lot of time talking her around, as did I when I was on set on Croc. I was still doing Sail until halfway through it, and then I quit that to join John. But the times that I got to be in Kakadu with Linda, I was there to comfort and keep her company and reassure her that this will be all right. And then gradually they just found each other, and then they found love for each other.
And do you think the movie's more powerful because they were sort of falling in love over a period of time? Maybe whether they...
I do.
Yeah, it was actual love story.
It's a true love story, and they stayed together for 20 years. And that kind of thing, when you see that on a screen, it's intangible. You're not quite sure why you're relating to that so strongly, but it's almost subliminal. It's so strongly there, but you can't quite put your finger on it. But there's a chemistry that comes off those scenes that was felt between those two people, because the first time that they kiss at the Billabong in the film was their first kiss.
And it was probably for real.
It was absolutely for real. And you can kind of see that in the way that Paul hesitates and looks at her a bit more, and then he kisses her. It was just, I put that in the documentary because I'm hoping that people will go to see the documentary because it will unlock so many of the things that people didn't know about what happened on the making of Crocodile Dundee, and we found this incredible footage, and it shows it all. And I really wanted to share that with people because it'll just add such a different dimension,
Lots of layers,
extra layer to their experience of watching the film when it comes out again in May.
And I'll be watching it again because of these things. One of the just out of interest, if I could just get really behind the scenes for a second, when that gets filmed, that kiss, that moment gets filmed. I'm talking about on set, not in the movie, but on set. And I presume there's an edit review at the end of the day, or at some stage behind after that. Would John come home and say, "You wouldn't believe it, Deli, like that kiss was amazing. It's great footage. I think he's falling in love with her, or she's falling in love with him, or they're falling in love with each other." Would you have that? Is that a discussion behind the scenes? Is that an observation and therefore a discussion? Well,
they were attracted to each other before the kiss, so we could see that was happening.
You could see the chemistry working.
Oh, absolutely.
You could see it? Yeah.
Definitely.
And how does it work though? Would you go to say to Corny, like, can you see it? Have you noticed what's going on here? Like, how does the discussion
Linda
go?
came to me because she
didn't want to sleep on the floor anymore.
She was I don't know where she was sleeping at the time, but she wasn't sleeping with Paul, so I guess she was on the floor.
On the floor with Peter Feynman and his wife.
She was really shocked. I mean, she felt this. You can see the chemistry in the behind-the-scenes footage in the documentary. You can see this chemistry building.
Wow.
Oh yeah, there's a glance. There's a glance that Paul gives, and it's so out of the corner of his eye, but she's like, got you. And Linda came to me because she was worried about Paul being married, and excuse me. She was worried about Paul being married and didn't quite know what to do. And I just said, I've never seen Paul like this. He is not a player. This is genuine. Like, he's not playing you.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to follow your heart.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Life is so wonderfully short. You better do the right thing by your heart. And they did. And so I think that, John swore me to secrecy. He said, "This is like the code of the West. What's on set stays on set." And okay, and that's unusual for me because I was friends with Nolene, Paul's wife at the time, so it was a bit of a difficult situation. But I don't interfere in people's lives. That's their business, and so I was there to support both Paul and Linda, though I never really got a chance to. That was more John's realm. But Paul knew that I was in support because of my attitude to Linda. And it was funny because when I showed Paul the documentary after I'd finished it, and in it I say that I was there as Linda's confidant, he went, "Were you?"
He didn't know.
Yeah, mate.
But you were just listening. You weren't egging her on. You were just listening.
No, God, no. I was not in my position to make anyone's choices.
Yeah, yeah. You're just listening.
But the only advice I had was, well, I think you have to follow your heart, and he's not going to play you. If he says he loves you, he'll be telling the truth. He tells the truth. Paul is such a man of integrity.
Yeah.
I've never heard him swear, except for when he saw the doco, and then he said, "It's fucking brilliant."
He liked it.
Yeah, I went, "Oh, that's an endorsement. I've never heard you swear." But he'll always stick up for the underdog. He's a good bloke. He's a good Aussie bloke. So he wouldn't do the wrong thing by anybody, and let alone a woman.
He sounds like a person of real honour.
Yeah.
For those who don't know him.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about the documentary.
Yeah.
It sort of not only does it give you behind the scenes, and gives you a greater context of how all these things happen, and particularly if going back beyond Crocodile and going down to the Paul Hogan show, etc., and John Cornell, but it gives everyone context, but also gives me, for example, from what you're just saying now, a better understanding of what was actually going on, and it sounded like it was a little bit unavoidable for Paul and her to fall in love with each other in those scenes. Like, like she's attractive, he's an attractive guy. There was some chemistry going on. You they get put in this situation. If you feel that way, if he felt that way, genuinely, and as you say, he wasn't a player, then there's no reason why he should be dishonest to himself about
That's
it.
right. He would never
And
have
her
been,
the same.
Yeah. He never kid himself.
No.
He'd never kid himself.
He's a
And
practical
John
dude.
wouldn't let him anyway.
Yeah.
Both of them were always good at keeping people in check.
Each other.
And me.
Yep.
There was no ego.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Absolutely do not get ahead of yourself and don't think your boots are too big. Be yourself, but be real and be humble. And so, I think that is a mark of their measure.
That's very Irish, Delvene Delaney. Don't get ahead of yourself. It very much is. Very much. So I need to ask you, it's the obvious question I need to ask because everybody wants to know this. The knife scene, that's not a knife. It was I don't know whether it was never meant to be so brilliant, but it just became so brilliant that they went, wow, that worked. Or was there purpose behind it?
Well, that's interesting, because even just the other day when I was reading this second draft, the knife scene, that line wasn't even in there.
In the second draft?
No, was not. I was amazed. I thought, wow, that got put in. I don't know how many drafts they did. I don't think they did too many because they didn't used to rewrite a lot. So I have to check the final draft, what number that was, because that's something that I would like to know because draft 2 was so different to the final script.
Was there much improv going on there? Like by Hogs?
No, not in those days. If you only had $8.8 million budget, that meant that you could only buy this amount of film because you shot on film and film was expensive. That meant that everybody involved had to be really on their mark, that you couldn't do take 137.
Yeah.
You didn't have enough film. So that made, for me, the teamwork much more collaborative and everybody on the same mission. And so there may have been, if there was a take 2 or 3 or 4, there might have been slightly different gestures, but no dialogue, no improvisation, no loose lips in that way. And so the knife scene somehow, the mugger was in there and there was a knife, but that's not a knife, was not in draft 2.
It wasn't.
No, and then the other really interesting thing about that too, that knife scene, is that when John was editing that scene, they didn't have that particular take. And he knew that it had been shot because what had happened with that particular take was that Peter Feynman had said cut and Paul kept mucking around with this kid, and he was playing with him. And
in his inimitable way, like just mucking around.
Mucking around after cut.
Yeah.
And he had a glint in his eye because he was being playful. And John had seen that when they were filming. And when they were editing, that's the take that he was looking for because it didn't look too threatening. It looked like, ha, ha, ha. And so that's not it. No, that's not it. There's another take. And it was in the editing room bin.
Wow.
And John fished it out and put that in the film because that was the take.
Maybe you got to just explain how the edit suite works. So
because back in the day.
Yeah, maybe explain.
Back in the olden days.
Now it's all digital, but
40
it's different.
years ago, you had to physically use a razor blade to splice the film. So you had these reels of film and then you'd have, say you had 4 takes and there might be a part of that scene, a particular take that was better than the take 2.
Which is also on the same tape.
Yes. So you might take that bit out and replace it with the better bit. And then you splice that together and thread it through and there it's one piece again.
Yep.
So.
And those parts you cut off are discarded.
Yeah.
They're thrown away.
Well, I've still got them.
Have you? Really?
I've got reels and reels and reels. of old Crocodile Dundee film.
Are you going to put it on digital?
It's all been digitised.
It's all been digitised.
But I'm still stuck with the physical assets.
Tapes.
So what we're going to do through our website is have a croc collection where you can buy a frame of film.
Oh, wow.
Bit of memorabilia.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The only thing you're going to have to get a microfiche reader to watch it, or shine a torch
lot
on it.
Of it's deteriorated, but it's certainly not usable. But
yeah, it's not usable. So,
no, it wouldn't be usable in one frame anyway.
Yeah, okay, but it's more for the fact that I've got something.
Yeah,
that comes from the original movie.
Piece of croc.
So John had to fish around in the bin or wherever the cutting floor and pick it up.
Yep.
And you've got to hold up and see what it looks like because you won't be able to work it out by looking at it.
Put it through the machine.
And he knew he saw that scene, he remembered it.
Yep. That's how, because he knew Paul, working so closely with Paul for so long, John knew intrinsically what Paul would deliver and what the feeling was when Paul delivered it. And he's looking for the feeling, the emotion, like that's inherent in that take. And that was that it was, I'm not going to hurt you, boy. I'm not going to blade your face.
Yeah.
I might cut up your jacket to teach you a lesson, but I'm not going to threaten you because I'm playing with you with my very big knife.
It's interesting that to me, and for people who talk to me from overseas, in particular Americans, that's the one scene that they never forget, and they always raise it. That's not a knife. This is a knife. And I don't whether they remember the scene or they certainly remember the words. What to you represents some of the more poignant moments out of the movie, apart from the knife? Now, what do you see as some of those poignant moments? Because you've just recreated the whole show, the whole movie, and you must be saying, "Wow, well, that was pretty bloody good." I remember the knife scene, but you would have seen in this process of recreating creating the documentary of things that really worked for the movie. Maybe the kissing scene. What do you see as some of the iconic moments in the movie, scene by scene?
I just think it's every scene has got a little highlight, whether it's his entry into the bar with the rubber crocodile.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, he's
in the
drunk.
Pub. Yeah.
And it's funny because what we also found was that there was a scene shot that didn't get used, where Mick is outside Walkabout Creek pub in the back of a ute, drunk, with the crocodile's tail hanging out as well as his legs of the ute cab. And you can't look at I found the black and white photo and you can't look at it and think, what the hell? Oh, God, that's that scene. And so I think this whole sense of arrival was whittled down to that one burst into the Walkabout Creek pub. I mean, what an entry.
Yeah.
For a script. And then the
I'm glad you reminded me of that scene too, by the
nonchalance
way.
of walking up to Linda, Michael J. Crocodile Dundee, never safaris, never go out with us or you'll never come back. Like there was this sort of throwaway, the constant throwaways. And I think for me there's not a favourite scene because it ripples through, whether it's when he's hypnotising the buffalo.
Oh, that one, yeah.
And he saunters back to the truck, like out of the Wild West, it's just like, it's Mick Dundee. Whether he's, when he's shaving with the razor and then he switches the blade of the knife because he sees Sue coming. All through it, there were these just comedic throwaways that were written in the script that seemed really natural, but in totality made that film work so well.
And it built his character.
And always building the character.
Just keep building the character all the way through the movie.
Yeah, all the little nuances of, the idiosyncrasies that Mick had.
Is that one of the reasons why the documentary, I should say, is probably going to be so powerful, not only in your mind, but in everyone's mind, because it just sort of takes us through what we probably forgot, because we haven't seen the movie for a long time. A lot of us haven't seen the movie for a long time.
Yeah.
It sort of takes us back through the process. Is that part of the idea of this? It's just, this is the important stuff.
A reminder. Remember when this happened? This happened to Australia. This put us on the map culturally. It made us recognised. And so don't you want to relive the beautiful outback cinematography again? I certainly did. I never get tired of watching that footage. It's beautiful. And now that it's restored to 4K, it's sparkling. It's extraordinary. It's almost better than when it was made because the technology is so much better in cinemas as well.
Because they can deepen the image, the colours,
you can adjust
everything,
everything.
nearly 3D
Just
sort
on
of
the
thing.
colour grade, yeah. So it's not only a reminder of that, it's a reminder of who we are too as well. Like, let's not forget that we're these basic, friendly people like Mick Dundee. And I'd like to remind people about that because I think for a start, we all need a bit of a laugh again. And it's not a very demanding movie. It's not highbrow. It's not super intelligent. You know, it's not asking a lot of people.
It's not The Matrix where you got to try and work out what's going on.
No. Just relax and enjoy it. Spend a lovely afternoon at the movies with your kids and your grandkids or your mum and dad or, you know, it's all ages. John set out to make a movie from 7 to 70 and he achieved that. And so I think it's just a really lovely reminder of what happened then for what can happen now.
Could you remind me of some, because I do remember, I sort of remember some of the stories when he was seeking investors.
Yeah.
Like in America. I think it was in America, wasn't it?
It was in Australia.
Australia, was it? What was that process like? I mean, because, you know, it cost a lot of money, $8 million to produce the movie, or maybe more after everything. And it did fabulously well. I mean, it's grossed, $500 million. What is the Crocodile Dundee today?
Like 387 million.
387, and it's the highest grossing
Globally.
Australian movie
Still.
ever. Yeah, still
Ever.
to this very day.
Even by today's conversions.
Yep. And so it did brilliantly for, relatively speaking, very low budget. But they didn't raise the money. They had to raise the money.
We did.
And take me through that process.
Well, so John went to his rich mates first, obviously, like Kerry Packer. And Kerry Packer put in quite a bit, over $1 million, and pulled it out.
What?
Because he was advised by one of his employees, who shall remain nameless, that it wasn't going to work and he shouldn't invest. And even though he was really great mates with John, he listened to this advisor and he pulled that money out.
Whoa.
And we couldn't get Hoyts to back it. They had somebody in the film industry, a director of note, who shall also remain nameless, who advised them that it was a second-rate script. Paul Hogan's a television star. He'd never make a movie star. They shouldn't go near it with a barge pole. Like, do not invest in Crocodile Dundee. So we couldn't raise the money. Really late in the piece, Kerry pulled his money out. So that meant that we had to scramble around to get investors because we were in pre-production. So we mortgaged our house and we went to mums and dads, family and friends, the cricketers. We just put it out there as a prospectus. $5,000 was the minimum. My mum and dad put that much in. They hardly had that much, but they backed John. And we raised the money that way.
Wow.
So those people who invested got like 12 or 13 times their money back. So Kerry was kicking himself.
Good.
Yeah.
So because most people just think these things just magically happen, and I know that it may be a bit boring, the money part of it, to audiences, but it's a critical part of it, and the critical part of the story is how we raise money. So you just pass the hat around.
Absolutely. Like, there was no crowdfunding. There was no, assistance from the New South Wales Film Commission. Like, none of that had started.
Yeah, because that didn't happen until the 80s, the Film Commission.
Yeah.
The Australian Film Commission.
So this was 85, but it wasn't alive then. Anyway.
No, you're right, because I was working in a law firm at the time. I remember the government introduced a thing where you get 110% tax deduction if you invest. Yeah, if you invest in one of these things.
Yeah.
So there was no real tax benefits for anybody. You just had to pass the hat around. How was it how'd you win people over, like your mum and your dad? Like, was it just faith in John and you and Hogs?
Faith in John and Hogs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, in the documentary, we speak to DJ, who was Dennis Johnson, who was the underwriter for the stockbroking firm at the time, and an old mate of Paul's. They grew up together in Granville. They were the Granville boys.
Granville, Sydney.
Yeah. And so he took the prospectus to his partner and said, there's an opportunity for us to invest in Paul Hogan and John Cornell. We should take it. And they did, but they also were advising other people too, John and Paul, like In Excess, that like so many people who were also going to be involved with the film, because In Excess wrote music for the film. Because at the time with 10BA, a lot of people thought that it was a tax write-off. You were expected to lose money.
That's why you got the tax deduction more than you put in, because you're expected to lose the dough, because there's not going to be a return.
But it happened the other way.
But that was great. But that's good for those individuals.
And John was thrilled. And in the documentary, I've got footage of him saying it felt good to have pensioners and people like that put a little bit of money into Crocodile Dundee and get a lot back. That feels good. And that was his approach to everything, was to make people have a win. And so, luckily for us, we had a win. He knew that there would be a win. John was extremely confident about the success of Crocodile Dundee, which is why he did the Blue Sky deal in America.
What can you take us through the Blue Sky deal?
So a Blue Sky deal, that's when you go to a distributor, and we got knockbacks, like 20th Century Fox didn't want to know about it.
You've got to explain, because the movie can make the movie. It's got to be a distributor, though. Someone's got to put it on screen. You make the movie,
then you take it to a distributor to sell to cinemas. So we're in America, and he's looking for the right distributor. And we took it to a couple, and John did, and they knocked it back. No, didn't even know where Australia was, really, or that we even spoke English much. So a few of them did because of the tourism campaign, but it wasn't going so well. So he had the film audience tested, which isn't usually done, certainly not by a producer. And he went to the same company where all the movie distributors have their audience tests done. So an audience test is when you show it to a select amount of people and they give you a rating. And the rating is normally 45. It's like that's acceptable. It got a 53, which was unheard of. And so the next place that he wanted to go to was Paramount, because they had big fancy iron gates. I'm going to go. They've got money. So he took it to them with the audience test. And they said, this is unusual. It's a 53. Where did you get it tested? And he said, I use the same company that you use. And so he was more armed than they were, really. And even though it had tested well, they didn't really think it was going to do what it did. They released it in autumn, or the fall, which is when they usually put their uncertain movies. And so John agreed to the deal where they got the greatest share up to a certain point. I think it was 20 million. And then a Blue Sky deal means that the producers take the greatest share, or take all the rest, I think it is.
Basically, Blue Sky.
After that cut-off point. And they're rubbing their hands together going, this is, these guys don't know what they're doing. We're going to clean up with that, and they can have the rest. Well, we had the rest.
The rest of the 380 million.
Yeah.
Well
so
done.
It took courage, I think, for John to do that, or self-belief, and he pulled it off.
A lot of times courage is self-belief.
Yeah. And so when he went back to negotiate for Croc 2, they said, you can take that straw out of your mouth now. We know what you're up to.
I remember him telling that story.
We'll fund it.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did. They funded Croc 2.
So, Deli, now we're at the end of our show now, but and we'll talk about where the show is going to feature. And I think it's next week, so we'll go through the details in a second. given that you've had an opportunity just to talk through it again, like in a long form, is there anything in the documentary for you that is an absolute highlight? Like, what is something in there that was a big highlight for you? There's something you discovered that you probably forgot about, or you maybe didn't even know about, because you've been rifling through old films and scripts, and talking to everybody and reliving the moments. And I don't know if you're talking to the directors, etc., who helped produce the show or direct the show in the beginning. What are some of the things that come out of it for Delvene Delaney?
Extraordinary things, extraordinary coincidences. I think it's John. When I joined the crew for Croc 2. I had 3 jobs. One of them was making of, directing that, and organising everything. So we never did that because we didn't need to at the time. It just took off again. We just never had time to make a making of. So I had that footage. Didn't really want to use Croc 2 footage in this story because it was really about Croc 1. So I was a bit short of footage, really. And then, even though we'd gone through every single tub, we thought, in my big shed of all the archival materials that belonged to John, that I unexpectedly found when I was looking for the restoration elements, when we were shooting, shooting
the documentary.
Yeah, in one of the rooms that we'd set up of the production office as an archival room. So I had all the tubs and the old scripts and the posters and the international posters and all this stuff. And then we did this observational sort of interview with Peter Feynman, the director, Ray Brown, Paul Hogan and me. And we didn't actually use that in the doco because we didn't need to. But the next day when we were packing it all down, there was this stack of 2 old, big 40-centimetre square plastic film reels. And on the side of them, I saw that it had Peter Feynman Productions, The Making of Hogs. And Peter Feynman was there. And I said, what are they? And he said, they'd be the making of Crocodile Dundee 1. And I went, what? I didn't even know you had someone making Crocodile Dundee 1. He said, oh, yeah, John Bowring. He said, that's why it's got Peter Feynman Productions, because John Bowring was a cameraman who used to do exterior shoots for the Paul Hogan show on film. And he'd always bill Peter at Channel 9. And so I said, well, what's the making of Hogs? He said, he's just written the title wrongly. I said, right. I could really use those. He said, they've probably got no sound. I don't even know if they'll be any good. And I said, I haven't seen them before. They weren't in amongst all the other archival stuff. Like, I don't even know. Victoria, have you seen that? Like, no one had seen them. And so he said, there's probably only one place in Australia that can restore those. So we sent them to this place in Melbourne with our breath held, and they came back in perfect condition.
With audio?
Yes.
Wow.
And excellent vision. And in those film reels was all of the content that I've used for the making of Crocodile Dundee behind-the-scenes footage. And Victoria and I looked at each other and went, John put those there.
Well, you are a very spiritual person. I've always known you to be that. I mean, you are extraordinarily spiritual as a person. I mean, I think you are. And you talked about, and I don't want to embarrass you, but you talked about Crocodile Dundee 1 being to some extent a love story between Hogs and Linda. Is this documentary about the love story between Delvene Delaney and John Cornell?
Yeah.
Is this your love story?
Letter. This is a love letter to John because I'm compelled to honour him and include him in the retelling. And his presence, I felt his presence so strongly. I'll give you an example. We started off calling the production company Lucky Ducks because John and I used to always say, we're such lucky ducks. And I didn't in the end, but for a while I was, and I had flying ducks on ducks were the motif, right? And so then we were setting the production office up, and I cleaned the shelves, and Victoria's putting stuff up, and she put John's binoculars from the boat his boat up on the shelf, and I kept looking at them thinking. And she said, "You don't want those there, do you?" I said, "No, they're a bit ugly. I think we can do better." And, I'll take them down. So she took them down. She put her hand back up and she grabbed something and she had a hand behind her back. And I should backtrack a little bit, because just before John passed, I asked him what bird he wanted to be remembered as, because we've got this tradition in our family. And he said, "A spangled drongo." And okay. And then we saw one about 6 months later, and I said to him, "Are you sure you want to be remembered as a spangled drongo? Because they're migratory. I won't see them much." And he said, No, I've changed my mind. I said, "Oh," and I said, "What?" And he said, "A kookaburra."
Oh, that's my favourite. You're serious? Oh, my God. You're killing me.
A kookaburra.
That's my favourite bird.
And I said, why a kookaburra? And he said, "Because they make people laugh."
100%. I love them. First to make people laugh in the morning.
Yeah, and the indigenous belief is that they ring the bell, they clear the air. The kookaburras clear the air morning and night, because it's like a bell ringing. So, okay, a kookaburra. So back to in the production office setting it up, Victoria brings her hand out and says, "Did you put this there?" And in her hand was a tiny little white ceramic duck. And I said, "No, I've never seen that before in my life." And she went, "And what about this?" And it was a kookaburra feather.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So he was overseeing the whole thing.
He's
He's
ever
ever-present.
Kookaburras at the most opportune times. I was struggling with the decision driving from my house to the production office the other day, and I've got a home burial plot where John is. I'm thinking away and I'm trying to work it out, and I looked over at his headstone, and on top was a kookaburra. And I went,
No.
"Okay, that'll do. I'll go with that decision. Thanks, John."
I have this silly thing in my mind. If I hear kookaburras like 5 a.m. before the sun comes up, if I hear them laughing wherever I am, my house in Sydney or my house up in Byron, wherever, I have the view that my day's going to be a good day.
Yeah.
They're laughing at whatever it is I might be worried about from the day before.
Yeah.
And they're basically sort of it's stupid. I know it's got no science associated with it, but it just makes me feel good.
And that's your symbolism, and that's great. And we all should have this connection to the other side of things that we're not indoctrinated by. You know, that's spirit, that's connection to other things in a different way that's personal to you. And people may think, as if John put them there. Who knows? I had a materialization from John. After he passed, I'm lying in bed one night, I rolled over, and he was there, as large as life. I didn't imagine it. He was there. He didn't stay long, but I've had so many ghost encounters that I know that there's something else in a different realm that I have no explanation for, but total acceptance of. And so whether it's through birds, and people say birds are messengers of the gods, you'll often see them at funerals, or you'll connect on some level with an ancestor, or a meaning, which is what you have. Why not embrace that? We can't be that ignorant to think that we know everything.
Yeah.
Because we don't.
And you're right. And I often, where I fail often is that I'm about evidence, and I'm always thinking, well, if the science can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist, when in fact science would be the first to admit to you that, or to us, that they don't know everything. They're still in the discovery. They're trying to discover everything, but they just don't know everything. And therefore, just because the scientists can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Absolutely not.
And I love that thought process.
Yeah.
And it sits out there. I mean, I'm glad you reminded me of the kookaburras. And I have a deep affection for John, always did. And, I've always had it like this. There's something that I felt, I always felt close to him when I saw him. I didn't see him that often, but, when I used to come up, I'd see him, and my youngest boy, Jimmy, loved him. And I was telling you the story about it before, and I'm not going to reiterate it now on this show, but Jimmy was only 11 at the time, but he still talks about him affectionately. And there's something about when you told me that he loved kookaburras, I felt like he was talking to me, because that's my favourite bird by far. There's no other bird in the world that gets anything close to a kookaburra. In fact, I got a painting of a kookaburra in the entrance of my house that I commissioned a lady to paint for me. And I just love them. I just love kookaburras. I love the fact that they're laughing all the time.
Yeah.
And
John
that's a great
really,
thing.
He really, really liked you, Mark. He spoke extremely highly of you.
Thank you.
You were one of his men.
Yeah.
You were one that he really liked.
You know, it's funny, when I can't wait to see the documentary, but it's when you think of people like John and people who we're close to who are past us, we often, from my point of view, and probably even the audience who used to love watching John Strop and who have respect for what he produced, a documentary like this, I think, is really important for people to see because it actually gets you closer to the understanding of why you feel warm towards that individual and why you feel warm towards Hogs. You know, why I relate to Strop and Cornell, why I related to the Paul Hogan show. I just love Paul Hogan show. Why I love Crocodile Dundee. And you're bringing all these little nuances out of the show in the making of in a documentary. I think that's extremely – that stuff needs to happen more often. I don't really remember seeing too many documentaries about movies, well-made movies that have been around a long time as to what the thought process was in making them. So this is a great initiative. And I'd love to see the same sort of thing about, for example, Breakham Rant or Gallipoli as well, those sorts of shows. What was behind the idea about it? Why were the people thinking about these things?
Yeah, I think what I've tried to do with the documentary as well is craft a love letter to John and an honouring
so good
of everybody who contributed their little spark to the lightning in the bottle. That it takes more than one person to create something as phenomenal as Crocodile Dundee. So yes, let's acknowledge and applaud those people. But as well, I wanted to showcase the values that are inherent in success. And when you have good values like true mateship, self-belief, courage, egalitarianism,
I love that one.
All of those things that we should all practice. And I'm not trying to be a preacher here. It's just in recognition of those values that are so much in the body of that film that you can feel it, but you probably couldn't verbalize it. You don't know quite what it is, but there's something that makes it good, and it's the good. And so I would like people to practice those values, to remember that as Aussies particularly, we have them. And if we practice those values, it makes things happen because you're doing good. And so I think that it's in there without being too, this is what I reckon you should do. It's just a nod to it. It's a recognition of the fact that if those values weren't in that film, maybe it wouldn't have been that film.
Which is probably why we all loved it, but we never really knew why.
Yeah, I think there's something in there. That's part of the magic. There's magic in Crocodile Dundee, and I don't think I'm overstating that.
No, totally.
Magic is intent in action. And so it was this incredible intention to make this terrific film that really showcased Australia and Australians. And those guys, everybody on that film, put that into action. And then, you brew the cauldron and off she goes. And it affects everybody in a really good way if it's well-intentioned. And I think that's what happened there.
With that is such a good summary of the whole thing, seriously. Did you rehearse that?
No, I didn't.
You just made up on the spot?
Yeah, I did.
You just channeled him. He just come through.
Maybe. Hi.
Well, let's just see where. So you can purchase tickets to the screenings next week. So we're going to put this up on Thursday. That's tomorrow. You and I are filming this on a Wednesday. There's going to be the screenings are next week and we're going to put in the links below in the show notes. So anybody wants to know where to buy tickets and where the film has been shown, you can go see it. It's going to be in cinemas from the 26th of March. Is that correct?
27th.
27th of March. And it's screenings nationwide?
Yeah. Across
the nation. If you want to, you can go to Kismet Movies. That's KISMETMOVIES, kismetmovies.com website to find screenings near you. Delvene, it's been absolutely awesome to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed myself very much.
Thanks for reminding me of the wonderful love story between you and John. And thanks for reminding me of my old mate.
Yeah.
The Kookaburra Man.
I call them corny boroughs now.
Corny boroughs. I love it. Thanks, Deli.
Thank you, Mark.